Welcome, fellow travelers of the forgotten roads and wanderers of wilds, to the Verdant Enclave. I'm your host and sometimes friendly DM. More relevant to today's discussion, I'm also your fellow wanderer and wilderness guide to the Ranger class of 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons. If you're new to the channel, welcome. If you're returning from the last few videos, thank you for continuing on this journey into the Ranger class with me. Last time, we discussed the level 7 features when the Ranger gained either defensive tactics or exceptional training, depending on whether one is a hunter or a beastmaster, respectively. If you want to hear the details, feel free to check out the video. For once, a choice is not the predominant gain at level 8 for Rangers. While they do choose between another ability score increase or a feat, they gain a feature which changes Ranger's mobility options, Land's Stride. Let's dive in. As I've stated for the level 4 video, in general, if I were playing a long-term game, I would choose to increase my ability scores, most particularly the ability which is most relevant to combat, such as dexterity or strength. This is a personal preference of mine, as it generally speaking aids gameplay in a more extensive manner, but it shouldn't be taken as the supposedly only way to play. It's a great opportunity to shore up a lacking area, looking at you, charisma score, or choose a feat if they're allowed at your table. Choose for yourself what works best for your character, playstyle, and adventure. The other feature gained represents not a set of options to choose from, but rather a package of attributes combined into a massive change in how the Ranger needs to think about the environment, Land Stride. This feature from the player's handbook reads as follows. Quote, moving through non-magical difficult terrain costs you no extra movement. You can also pass through non-magical plants without being slowed by them, and without taking damage from them if they have thorns, spines, or a similar hazard. In addition, you have advantage on saving throws against plants that are magically created or manipulated to impede movement, such as those created by the Entangle spell. One of the first times I read this ability, one of my initial reactions was wondering if this could be used as a kind of climbing or swimming speed, as both cause the same mechanical effect as difficult terrain. 1 foot of movement costs 1 extra foot. Technically speaking, however, this is just an environmental factor that difficult terrain can actually be added on top of. So no, I realized that Land's Stride was not a replacement for a climbing or swimming speed. So what then does this ability actually provide? There are at least 4 identifiable benefits to Land Stride, so let's break them down. 1. Ignore non-magical difficult terrain. 2. Non-magical plants do not slow you down. 3. Non-magical plants do not cause you damage for passing through them. 4. Advantage on saving throws against magically created or manipulated plants that impede movement. I had to come to the realization that the first benefit largely depends on both the campaign and the DM, but nearly every campaign has some amount of difficult terrain for different encounters. Now, the Natural Explorer feature lets a ranger's party ignore difficult terrain specifically during travel, but Land's Stride now lets the ranger alone ignore all non-magical difficult terrain, whether traveling or not, or more particularly, during combat. If you are dealing as a ranger with enemies who have ranged attacks, then gaining extra ground on them is relatively beneficial, the same as for flying enemies. On the other hand, while others are struggling to get to cover from those ranged attacks, or dashing in order to get there, the ranger can now move completely normally, get to cover, and still attack or dash or dodge, etc. Maybe this enables you to get to an endangered companion and administer aid of some kind, while everyone else was hindered by the difficult terrain. If you are a range-focused character dealing with melee-focused enemies, going through non-magical difficult terrain will slow them down, while you can use it to your advantage and put distance between you and them while still using your action to attack. They could use their actions to dodge or dash, but in either case, at least they won't be attacking you. Remember that the previous level, you may have received defensive tactics as a hunter, and now you can layer maneuvering on top of your defensive and offensive capabilities. As a point of comparison, consider that the feat Mobile will also provide the ability to ignore difficult terrain, so long as you take the dash action on top of choosing the feat, a sort of double cost in order to replicate what a level 8 ranger can now do for free all the time, and that's just to get one benefit of the 4 that Land's Stride provides. One of the reasons I wondered about this feature specifically is because the ranger gets access next level to Plant Growth, a spell that imposes a 4-foot movement cost to every 1 foot of movement within its area of effect. And I was hoping that Land's Stride would enable the ranger to ignore this. Sadly, the spell does not technically create difficult terrain. It does, however, cause the plants in the area to become thick and overgrown, but remain non-magical, which leads to the next 2 benefits, that non-magical plants do not slow those with Land's Stride down, nor cause them damage. A brief side note here, this does not apply to spike growth, as the thorns are magically created and sustained, while plant growth merely causes existing plants to grow suddenly thicker. Interestingly, there is a sample of dangerous plants in the Dungeon Master's Guide, which does have thorns and do cause damage to those who come into contact with it. Land's Stride would allow the ranger to completely ignore this damage, turning an environmental hazard into a potential natural refuge. The final benefit is unfortunately going to come up most often when the ranger is dealing with opponents who regularly use such spells or conditions, and therefore this is the most conditional benefit of the feature, while the preceding benefits are simply constant and permanent. Still, advantage on saving throws is never a bad thing, or better put, advantage is rarely ill-received by players. While the use of this particular benefit of Land's Stride may be extremely limited, it is still a freely gifted advantage on top of a highly flexible tool. If you've been following the adventures of Adrian and Varen in the Land of the Hunter series, then you will likely know that they were recently joined by Thea, and that both Adrian and Varen recently achieved level 5. As the group has grown, and the characters will continue to grow, the tracking and reporting of their combat performance will be moved to a different format. For now, I put together a level 8 ranger to show how the 8 levels of choices can be assembled so far to produce an effective combatant, as well as to exhibit why careful attention needs to be paid to which choices are being made and how they will interact together. Let's dig in. For this build, I chose the half-orc race, emphasized strength as my main attribute with a 16 score, dexterity 13, constitution 14, intelligence 10, Wisdom 14, and Charisma 9. I chose two simple weapons, the hand axes, and scale mail as my starting armor. The result was an AC of 15, plus 5 to hit, 1d6 plus 3 on a hit, or 6.5 on average. At level 2, I chose the two-weapon fighting style. This is important for later. At level 3, I went Hunter subclass, Giant Killer. Combined with the previous level's choice of fighting styles, this is a very melee-focused character, but my armor class is still only 15, so I'm comparatively easy to hit. Relying on concentration spells such as Hunter's Mark would therefore be suboptimal for me, because I'm more likely than not to lose concentration. At this level, Cure Wounds would be one of my first spell choices, though that won't continue for long. Level 4, I tended to my defenses with an ability score improvement, +1 to my dexterity, making my armor class 16, and increasing my charisma to 10. Level 5, I gained extra attack, and chose Lesser Restoration. It's about this point that I would at least consider trading out Cure Wounds. Ultimately, it just won't keep pace with the damage I'd be taking versus the spell slot and action I'd be spending. It is still a good option for bringing up downed allies since I'm not relying on my spells for combat. Level 7, I chose Multi-Attack Defense. This is where my earlier fighting style choice now leaves me comparatively vulnerable. If I want to rely on my fighting style, I leave myself more vulnerable to incoming attacks. Whereas if I had considered taking a shield and using either defense or dueling fighting styles, I'd be much harder to hurt and be able to capitalize on multi-attack defense. As it is, it might still prove useful, but that remains to be seen. Finally, level 8, I go back to my basics and increase my strength with a +2 and gain Lance Stride. Now, if I am up against a large or larger creature, I can expect to do 7.5 per hit on average with my attack, extra attack, bonus action attack, and finally my reaction attack from Giant Killer, for an average 30 points per round. This does not take into account advantage or disadvantage or the chance for critical hits. Well, that's fine for estimating, but I decided to test it out with a combat scenario. I did not take into account terrain, or movement, or tokens, but rather I simply rolled dice and did math, as I put this solo ranger with 42 hit points, armor class 16, and 2 hand axes against a wyvern with 110 hit points, an armor class of 13, and multi-attack with bite, claw, or tail stinger. For frame of reference, this would count as a deadly encounter, which as follows is, quote, a deadly encounter could be lethal for one or more player characters. Survival often requires good tactics and quick thinking, and the party risks defeat, end quote. The wyvern won initiative and attacked but missed, triggering the ranger's reaction for 4 points of damage. The wyvern missed its second attack, and then the ranger went on the attack, hitting the next 3 attacks for 6, 8, and 9 points. Round 2, the wyvern hit twice, but it would not have hit the second attack had the ranger had a higher base armor class, in other words, higher than 16, as the wyvern rolled a 21 on its second attack. Had I built the ranger with a greater focus on defense, he would not have gotten hit. However, the ranger's reaction attack still landed for another 5 points, which was followed up with attack, extra attack, and bonus action attack for 9, 9, and 6 respectively. Round 3, the wyvern missed both its attacks, but still triggered the ranger's reaction, which landed for 9 points of damage, and the ranger continued its rampage with his attack, extra attack, and bonus action attack for 7, 10, and 6 respectively. Round 4, the wyvern hit twice for another 19 points of damage. And again, multi-attack defense would have protected the ranger had I paid better attention to his base armor class and made sure to bolster it during my initial build design. However, the Ranger replied with its reaction for another 9 points, and followed that up with his attack, extra attack, and bonus action attack for 8, 0, and 10 points, ending the fight with 1 hit point and leaving the Wyvern at -5, without using spells of any sort, and missing only 1 attack out of 16. The Ranger dealt a total of 115 points of damage. Dividing that total by 15 hits, my average damage per hit turned out to be 7.67, 0.17 higher than I estimated it would be. My totals per combat round were 27, 29, 32, and 27, which works out to be an average of 28.75 per round, 1.25 lower than my estimation, though not by a large margin. I hope this is so far proving interesting to you, as it is to me. I will be adding a different video to report on Adrian, Thea, and Varen's combat performance, since we have all leveled up again since. In the meantime, I hope you will join us in the land of the hunter. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a great day.